what it did on October 7th. Not a single one of the countries represented here or that met together today, or for that matter, pretty much any country in the world, would simply accept the slaughter of its citizens and do nothing about it. So, we maintain again that Israel has a right and indeed an obligation to defend itself and to try to take the steps necessary to ensure that what happened on October 7th never happens again. But equally, it is very important how Israel does this. And in particular, it's important to take every possible measure to protect civilians and to prevent harm to them, as well as to ensure that those who need assistance get it. And in our conversations with the Israeli government, including just yesterday, we have pointed to steps that they could and should take to minimize harm to civilians, to prevent civilian casualties.
Hello, friends. Nice to be on today to share some thoughts with you. Because, you know, anyone who has a heart, will be very troubled, will be very affected by the recent images that we're seeing. The recent images that we're seeing. And I've got some clippets, you know, a few short videos that I'd like you to see, because I'd like to compare what I'm seeing to Bible prophecy. I'd like to compare what I'm seeing to Bible prophecy. The book of Revelation 13 in the Holy Bible gives the account of a lamb-like beast. The beast is lamb-like in, you could say, in personality. The beast is in its behavior, in its deportment, in its profession. It's lamb-like. But the beast began to change. The beast began to change. The beast began to behave lamb-like and speak nicely and welcoming and sympathetic to the downtrodden. The beast was very accepting of people of different nationalities, of different religious persuasions, of different spiritual beliefs. But then that lamb-like beast, suddenly that lamb-like beast began to change. That lamb-like beast began to change in its attitude, in its kindness. That lamb-like beast became unkind and cruel. That lamb-like beast began to be persuaded by political climate changes. By political climate changes. The retaliation of Israel on the Gaza Strip has changed many people in their attitude and their thinking towards the country of Israel and its politicians. I believe there are very nice people that live in Israel, very good people that lives there. that are not for the current leadership. Because to think of it, friends, before this war started, Benjamin Netanyahu was being investigated and tried for corruption in his country. His being perceived in his own country as being crooked, basically. Would you believe anything that a crook or someone who is crooked says? Would you believe anything that they say? I wouldn't. I would not. Let's face it, though, he has not been tried in a court of law as yet. I don't think he has been tried in a court of law for the charges that were brought against him. But at the same time, when you look and see how he has prosecuted the war in Gaza in response to the Hamas invasion of Israel, you've got to say that to give it to him, that this man is a cold-blooded murderer and a mass killer.
I'm Amy Goodman. A top United Nations official in New York has resigned and accused the United Nations of failing to address what he calls a textbook case of genocide unfolding in Gaza. Craig McIver is a longtime international human rights lawyer who served as director of the New York office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. He'd worked at the United Nations since 1992 and lived in Gaza in the 1990s. In a letter addressed to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, Craig McIver wrote, "In Gaza, civilian homes, schools, churches, mosques, and medical institutions are wantonly attacked as thousands of civilians are massacred. In the West Bank, including occupied Jerusalem, homes are seized and reassigned based entirely on race, and violent settler pogroms are accompanied by Israeli military units. Across the land, apartheid rules." Craig McIver went on to write, "What's more, the governments of the United States, the United Kingdom, and much of Europe are wholly complicit in the horrific assault. Not only are these governments refusing to meet their treaty obligations to ensure respect for the Geneva Conventions, but they're in fact actively arming the assault, providing economic and intelligence support, and giving political and diplomatic cover for Israel's atrocities," unquote. On Tuesday, the UN released a statement about McIver's resignation, saying, quote, "I can confirm he's retiring today. He informed the UN in March of his upcoming retirement, which takes effect tomorrow. The views in his letter made public today are his personal views," the UN said. Craig McIver joins us now in New York, the first day he's not working for the United Nations. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you, Amy. Good to be here.
So talk about why you left.
Well, I originally registered my concerns in writing to the High Commissioner in March, as you heard from that statement, in the wake of a wave of human rights violations on the West Bank, including the pogrom in Hawara at that time. And at that time, I complained really about what I saw as a trepidatious response by many in the United Nations, and an effort to try to silence some of the human rights critique of UN officials, including myself. I admit to feeling a great deal of frustration, and at that moment indicating that I would be resigning from the UN effective this month. So, of course, the situation got much worse since then, which is why I was, particularly the events in Gaza, which is why I was compelled to write this latest letter to the High Commissioner to put on record my very serious concerns about how we were failing to address the unfolding events in the occupied territories.
What do you think the United Nations, the United States, the West, UK should be doing right now?
Well, I think there is an obligation on the part of all member states of the United Nations, including those states in the West, to respond in accordance with their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law. My central point in the most recent letter was that we had effectively left international law behind when the international community embraced the Oslo process, which sort of raised up notions of political expediency above the requirements of international law. And that was a real loss for human rights in Palestine. I think there is an obligation on the part of all states, not just to respect international humanitarian law and international human rights law, but under the Geneva Conventions to ensure respect. And it's clear that many states, including the United States itself, have are not only in breach of their obligation to ensure respect vis-a-vis those states over which they have influence, in this case Israel, but have been actively complicit, actively engaged in arming and diplomatic cover, in political support, intelligence support, and so on. That is a breach of international humanitarian law. We need the opposite of that. We need all states, members of the United Nations, to use whatever influence they have to ensure an end to these attacks on civilians in Gaza, to ensure as well accountability for the perpetrators, redress for the victims, protection for the vulnerable there. It's interesting, Amy, we have a formula at the United Nations that is applied to virtually every other conflict situation. But when it comes to the situation in Israel and Palestine, there's a different set of rules, apparently. And that's, I think, a big source of my frustration. Where is the transitional justice process? Where is the UN protection force to protect all civilians? Where is the tribunal for accountability? Where is the action on the part of the Security Council, the only mechanism in the United Nations that has enforcement to ensure protection in the occupied territories? Obviously, every effort in the Security Council is vetoed by the United States itself, and further indication of the kind of complicity about which I am referring. And I think the other
of war is truth. You see, we contextualize this argument of Israeli and Palestinian dynamics based upon two factions, when the reality is there's an originating circumstance that gets eliminated from the argument, not even part of the discussion. Now, I do believe Cenk is correct on the narrative dynamic associated with this, but historical context is required. 1917 is your historical context, because in 1917, something happened that was unprecedented. The European world decided, well, to back a 67-word document called the Balfour Declaration. Put up, Mr. Balfour. Mr. Balfour, and also a man named Lionel Walter Rothschild at the center of the debate. They get left out of this. I'm about to put these gentlemen squarely where they belong. The Balfour Declaration, which resulted in a significant upheaval in the lives of Palestinians, was issued on November 2nd, 1917. The declaration aimed to establish a Jewish state in Palestine into a reality when Britain publicly pledged to establish a national home for the Jewish people there. The pledge is generally viewed as one of the main catalysts of the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine in 1948, and the conflict that ensued. It is regarded as one of the most controversial and contested documents in the modern history of the Arab world, and has puzzled historians for decades. The Balfour Declaration, which means promise in Arabic, all right, was a public pledge by Britain in 1917, declaring its aim to establish a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. That is a fact. The statement came in the form of a letter from Britain's then Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, addressed to Lionel W. Rothschild. It was made during World War I. This was 1914 to 1918, and was included in the terms of the British mandate for Palestine after the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. The so-called mandate system set up by the Allied powers was a thinly veiled form of colonization and occupation. They colonized, forced colonization. The system transferred rule from the territories that were previously controlled by the powers defeated in the war: Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria, to the victors. The declared aim of the mandate system was to allow the winners to administer the newly emerging states until they could be independent. That was the first proclamation. The document was controversial for multiple reasons. Number one, it was, in the words of the late Palestinian American academic Edward Said, made by European power about a non-European territory, and a flat disregard of both the presence and the wishes of the native majority resident in that territory. In essence, the Balfour Declaration promised Jews a land where the natives made up more than 90% of the population. There's much more history connected to that, which also includes how Palestinians attempting to boycott this invasion eventually economically withdrew from the ecosystem of economy of Jewish-made things, Jewish-grown food. The British came in and did a mass incarceration, arrested them by the thousand when they enacted these, policies to create more equity in their system. And then on the other side of that, you have this force that is enforcing their rule of law. There's no diplomacy here. There's no opportunity to engage thoughtfully. There's our way or no way. So when we talk about this conflict, understand war is never necessary. War is here because of the permeation of evil that exists inside of us as human beings. That's the reason it's here. So don't accept their framework that it is necessary. War is not a necessary reality of our living.
What is really happening in the Middle East, and it's based on the domestic political situation that's going on in Israel, where factions that are racist are in charge of the government, the auxiliary part of the government, the ministerial part of the government, the ministries, including the Ministry of National Security, which what is equivalent to a Klansman is running right now. So when you pay your taxes and you work hard and you pay your taxes for the government of the United States to look after you here, that money is being is being used now. That money is being used to assist in a genocide, basically in Israel, because the money to buy arms and the funds that are donated to this country. I don't understand what the history of the relationship between America and Israel. I don't understand that political connection. I don't understand it much. I know it is there, and I know that Israel is seen as a great ally of the United States, but I do not know very much what Israel do for the United States, why the United States is investing all those billions in Israel while Israel is doing genocide. The world stood up to Adolf Hitler. I've said it times and times again that the world stood bravely against Adolf Hitler. I've got uncles and cousins who have died in the last World War on my mother's side of family and my father's side of family, who fought for Britain in the last World War, who fought for Britain in the last World War, as my home country, Jamaica, was a part of the British Empire. And my mom have told me stories of her cousins and of her uncles who did not come back in fighting that great war. Did not come back. So those things have affected my family and has affected my mom's family. There are people within our family that came back without toes, with feet their foot or feet amputated, amputations, you know. So our relatives and our family had been impacted by the last World War, going up against Nazi Germany, you know. That war was fought by the entire world, including America. But I just want you, a lot of people did not know that Jamaicans fought in that war on Britain's side, because Jamaica was a British, you could say, colony. It was a British colony, and which came to an end in 1962. So many of our family members had went and fought in that war. Some didn't come back, and some came back without arms, legs, amputations. You know, I would like to let you know that. I'd like you to listen to you know, arguments for and against the war in an interview with Piers Morgan and Dershowitz and another gentleman, another professor who argues against the war and why and what he would like to see at the end of the war, because I believe that many war crimes have been committed, and someone has to be accountable, to be held accountable for mass murder, because that's 15,000 precious lives of God's creation, Those people are not, you know, they are acting as a lot of these policymakers and politicians. When they talk in absentia, because they talk as if the Palestinian people are nothing, and they talk about public policy and political policy without even mentioning the fact that 15,000 people up to today have been exterminated by Benjamin Netanyahu and his army in Israel, and they're still doing a genocide, because I do not know what their motives are. Could it be for land? Could be for land. Could it be for more land? You know, taking over Gaza. It could be power hungry, as well as it could be out of political desperation why he's doing it. Because before this war began, as I've said, he has been under investigation and was being charged with offenses of corruption. His crony Itamar Ben-Gvir has had 12 charges against him for civil rights violations against Palestinians. And I doubt if he has ever spent one single day in jail, because he has never been tried. Even though he's found guilty, he has never been made or being punished for any of those crimes, because no Israeli is gonna go to jail, to go to prison for a Palestinian. It's not gonna happen. Similarly, as usually happen in the southern United States, where no white man would have gone to jail for the lynching of a black man. Similar scenario. It had happened here, but I'm just bringing that to your attention, that it had happened here before, where no white man would have gone to prison for lynching a black man in the southern United States, or anywhere for that matter. You know, so it's a different situation, but the same act. You know, And I'd like you to listen to a couple videos, and you could comment and tell me what you think. God bless you, and have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Heavenly Father, bless our hearts. Bless our hearts, I pray. Help us to be compassionate and help us to speak out. Help us to speak out to those who are heading us in politics, to our governors, to our senators, to our Congress people, to our president, and to all leaders. Let them know and understand, Lord, that that situation in the Middle East, in Gaza, is unacceptable. But Lord, let us also prepare, because our time is coming, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
A settlement. The obstacle is Israel, backed by the United States, opposes a two-state settlement on the basis of international law, the law that has been defined by the International Court of Justice, the legal arm of the United Nations. Now, I'm going to make one remark now which you will find perhaps controversial or unacceptable, Piers. However, I hope you'll allow me to say it, and then you can engage it, as you said, in a civil fashion. You say that the actions of Hamas have disqualified it from any participation in a peaceful settlement. Now, I am not going to make any brief for Hamas. It's for the people of Palestine to decide who should be their leaders, who should represent them. But I do have to ask you, Piers, and I respect you. So I'm asking you this as a matter of not rhetoric, but one intelligent person to another. I'm asking a simple question. If it's the case that the actions of Hamas on October 7th disqualify it from being party to a peaceful settlement, roughly 1,200 people were killed, about 30 of them being children. Why is it not then also the case that the actions of the state of Israel since October 7th, the deliberate war of genocide against the people of Gaza, which has left about 15,000 people dead, not 1,200, 15,000, and has left dead not 30 children, but has left dead about 7,000 children. And as we speak now, 7,000 more children are threatened with death because of starvation. I ask you, as a logical proposition, why isn't the state of Israel disqualified from any final settlement of the question? And one last thing, because you ask, what do I believe? I will tell you what I believe. I believe, number one, immediately after the war comes to an end and the blockade of Gaza, that cruel, inhuman blockade of Gaza, that war crime in Gaza, that crime against humanity, the blockade of Gaza, it has to be lifted. But once there's a ceasefire, and once that inhuman blockade of Gaza is lifted, once the walls of that concentration camp come tumbling down, then I see two steps. Step number one, there have to be war crimes prosecutions. I have no problem in saying on both sides, but there must be accountability. You cannot get away with executing a war of genocide in broad daylight and then continue. And number two, there has to be a settlement on the basis of international law. That is the only consensus basis for ending the conflict once and for all.
Okay. I want to just a very quick reply, please, Professor Dershowitz. I was going to end it there, but I want to give you a right of reply on that one point. You're a lawyer. This point about international law, when President Biden, the head of America, the biggest, strongest ally for Israel, comes out and says that the bombing has been indiscriminate, he is accusing Israel directly of committing war crimes. That is a war crime, if it has indeed been indiscriminate. Is this war now at a stage where America may pull its support because they believe that Israel is breaching international law?
It's not. Today, 10 Israeli soldiers, including a commander, were killed in northern Gaza because Israel refused to bomb that site, which it could easily have done. Instead, it sent in brave 18, 19, 20-year-olds, some of them considered children under the Hamas definition of anybody under 19, and they were all killed because Israel made a decision not to bomb indiscriminately. It has never bombed indiscriminately.
Announced Israel is taking responsibility for what it calls the accidental death of 3 hostages. NBC's Hala Garani has more for us. What do we know, Hala?
Yeah, we're just looking through that full IDF statement for you, Chris. It appears that during a combat operation in Shujaya in the Gaza Strip, the IDF, the Israeli military, mistakenly shot and killed 3 hostages that were trying to flee. Their bodies, we're being told, were transferred to Israeli territory for examination, and it's upon examination of the bodies that they determined that there were 3 Israeli hostages inside of Gaza, perhaps, as I mentioned there, attempting to run away from their captors. The Israeli military might have confused them with Hamas and at that point took aim at them and shot them. We understand that 2 of the hostages have been named. One is Yotam Haim, who was kidnapped on October 7th from Kibbutz Kfar Aza. The other one is Samer Talalka, kidnapped also on October 7th from Kibbutz Nir Am. The third hostage not named at the request of the family of that individual. They have been notified, though, so all families, the 3 families of those 3 individuals, have been notified of the deaths of their relatives. And you can imagine knowing that up until very recently they had managed to survive inside the Gaza Strip in Hamas captivity, and that eventually they ended up being killed by friendly fire.
There are a lot of innocent people being killed by bombs that Israel is raining down upon Gaza.
I think it will be seen that the IDF really has done everything that is humanly possible to try to safeguard innocent civilians.
It's very hard to believe that, especially on a day when one of our producers lost 9 members of his family, 9 members of his family who are not members of Hamas, not members of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, not members of any group, just 9 people just trying to live their lives.
Who is that man and what has he done with Jake Tapper? Because that is not something that I've become accustomed to seeing on his show or from Jake Tapper. But CNN had Israel's Mark Regev on, and he, spewed the usual talking points that we've heard from most individuals representing Israel on our cable news channels. And he said that, we're doing what we can to prevent civilian casualties, even as the number of civilian deaths in the Gaza Strip continues to rise day after day as a result of Israel's aerial bombardment of the region. Now, clearly, Jake Tapper wasn't buying his argument, and maybe the fact that the story is now much closer to him due to the loss of family that one of his producers experienced is what's kind of informing his reactions to what Regev is saying here. But I just want to zoom in on Tapper for a second, because look at the skepticism on his face. It is pretty amazing.
I think it will be seen that the IDF really has done everything that is humanly possible to try to safeguard innocent civilians.
It's very hard to believe that, especially on a day when one of our producers lost 9 members of his family, 9 members of his family who are not members of Hamas, not members of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, not members of any group, just 9 people just trying to live their lives.
So Cenk, I'm real curious what you think about the exchange so far. There's a lot more to get to, but what do you think?
Yeah, so this Mark Regev guy, his job is to do propaganda. That's okay, he's from a different government, a foreign government, and he's here to justify killing overwhelmingly civilians, over 15,000. They haven't been able to show any Hamas fighters that were killed. The Hamas fighters are in the tunnels are perfectly intact. And even the IDF says at most 1,000 to 2,000, an outrageous, ridiculous number that isn't close to true. But even if you take it at face value, that means at least 13,000 civilians bombed to death, their heads crushed, their bodies lit up,
dismembered as a result.
That's right.
Yeah.
Hello fans. Thank you for watching this video, and remember to please subscribe, like, share, and promote this video to your friends and family. Until next time, please have a wonderful day.